piping and cabling. So this is an extension within Creo to basically go seamlessly from a 2D schematic to a full 3D design of a piping and cabling layout. So some challenges we're hearing from customers in regards to a lot of this, I always usually take a step back and talk about, what we're hearing from other customers. A lot of times routing is done on the shop floor. It can be a big mess, disorganized. There's no real plan in place. Some people aren't even doing any kind of routed design for any of their piping and cabling routes. Sometimes if they do use a program, it might be a third-party tool, might not necessarily be integrated with a CAD solution. Set everything up in one system, print it out, then maybe even try to figure it out on the shop floor. And we're just dealing with incomplete and inaccurate documentation. You don't want to find out that there's a problem when this guy climbs into the fuselage over here and finds that there was an issue with the documentation because there wasn't something communicated between the overall design intent and the actual CAD drawings that were produced and the harness drawings that were produced. So to eliminate some of these issues, that's where we went forward and developed that piping and cabling extension. So this is a complete integrated suite of tools for routed system design within Creo. It comes in 3 different flavors here, and they don't necessarily all need to be connected to each other, but they are offered, for whatever level of detail we want to get into. The first portion here is a 2D schematic. So this is not something that is necessary to go forward with a 3D design of a cable harness or a piping route, but this allows me to lay out my process in a 2D environment and give a very simplistic look to this. So basically set up the logic of the whole system. And then I can either go into my 3D harness design or 3D piping design with that logic, or just start fresh on its own. So go to 3D with the 2D information, or just start from just right within Creo. So it covers 3D harness design as well as 3D piping design. And it's a similar process to both of these because they're both routed designs, but there are things that are going to be individual to those that we have to be concerned about, which we'll go into here. First, a little bit more detail about the 2D schematics. So this is a single multi-discipline UI regardless of where we're going to go with it. So this is where I can lay out the process and the major components and attachments in 2D. I can set up my blocks, circuit, wiring, and piping and instrumentation diagram, set everything up in this simple 2D environment, and then take that logic into Creo in the form of an XML export. So when I'm all done, spit this out and be able to have Creo interpret all the work that I've done here. And these aren't just lines on a page that I have drawn out. It's going to recognize exactly how many cables I have, where they're going to, where they're coming from, what this equipment's going to be called, what CAD model these would actually be linked up to. And this allows me to go seamlessly to my CAD solution and be able to recognize, okay, how many cables do I still need to model out? How many do I still need to route? What piece of equipment do I not have a 3D model for, and are they not currently in my design? It's basically going to create like a checklist for me or a homework list where I can just go through and say, yep, I've done that. I have that from the schematic. I have this from the schematic. Make sure I've done all the work that I need to. For that 3D cabling design, we take this to 3D, either automatically route or manually route this. Whatever's going to be best for our system. If we want to set up a schematic, it's going to be sort of complicated. I can set it up that way. Maybe I just want to say, this is route a cable from this point to that, from this point to this point. It's going to be this type of wire. It's from this color spool, and route it that way. So it's really whatever's best for my system. So once we have the cables routed, we also have the ability to create all the extra stuff, markers, splices, tie wrap, shrink wrap, just that detail that we're going to need, as well as choosing how this is going to be bundled together. There's going to be ribbon cables, giving myself a good visual representation, as well as having a very controlled bill of material at the end of this process. Individual harness drawings might be the goal of this, be able to exactly kind of link up what cable is going to be part of what harness. For the 3D piping design, this is also covered in the extension, either automatically route or manually route. It could be a lot easier to do this from the schematic. It might just be easier to route a few pipelines, just more in a manual effort. Once we have them routed, we also have the ability to do lightweight representations of these. It tends to be messy, so it's nice to have something that, if I have a very large assembly, I can have a very simple representation of those, those lines for pipe routes. For piping, it's a little bit different than cables. I'm not just following a straight route. I'm going to be concerned about all the different pipe sections I'm going to have. So there's extensive manipulation tools to be able to build those out, different pipe shapes, bend radiuses, stock that we're concerned about, choosing exactly how I want to get from point A to point B and how many sections it's going to be split up into. For some of the extra stuff, fittings per specification. So we have a whole library of fittings spec'd out to various different sizes that you can always extend onto as well. So as I go to place a fitting onto a particular pipe section, It's going to understand some of the logic in terms of what size pipe are we trying to put this onto, the schedule of pipe, and then choose the correct fitting from that. I just have to worry about the actual options in terms of how this is going to be put onto the 3D model, and not necessarily having to double check, all right, is this the right fitting for the right pipeline that I'm placing this into? We also have rule compliance, minimum maximum radius, checking missing fittings, flow violation, just having the system do a sanity check for me after the fact to make sure that I have everything that I need and nothing's particularly outstanding that's wrong. And at the end of the process, of course, be able to get my automatic cut list, bend tables, bill material, drawings, everything can really just be taken out of my Creo assembly. We also have the ability to speak to different isometric drawing software. So like for some isogens, so we have the ability to do that as well. So now for the actual demonstration of this portion, we're going back into Creo Parametric. I have my P-bot here. We're going to be looking at a particular section of this assembly here. We have this electrical and piping assembly that we're looking at. I have different representations that show just the cabling, just the piping. For this demonstration, we'll be focusing on the cabling aspect, but as I said, the extension does cover both as well. Now, the other portion of this, not just the Creo Parametric part, but the schematic part, this is where our story can start. And it, again, doesn't necessarily have to start here, but this allows me to set some of that logic up in a 2D environment. So here we are within Creo Schematics. We won't go into too much detail of this particular solution because it is kind of its own standalone thing. It sits outside of Creo Parametric. It just falls into the Creo family. This is where I can start to apply all my different wire routes or pipe routes. So here we have a particular wire route that we're putting into this that is going from my power distribution to my pneumatic controller. And this is where I would set up some of the different properties associated with all this. You know, what types of wires are we putting these into? What type of pneumatic controller is that? Even maybe what manufacturer is this coming from? So setting up the logic of what is everything on this page and then bringing that over into the Creo space. So we have a new route put in here. I want to spit this off as an XML export. Specifically, we're going to be targeting cable within Creo Parametric. We do the whole design. We might just maybe do a current sheet if necessary. Validate the XML, make sure that we don't have any invalid objects, and then just choose the correct file name that we want to send this off to. You can even overwrite other files, and then we can have Creo recognize changes to XML documents. So if I've already done some cable routes here, this would just allow me to pick up from where I started, after those changes have been made. So we're going to be focusing on one particular section of this subassembly. So we can go over to my pneumatic route. This is where we're going to route some of the cables that we are missing from our design. So where do we get to our piping and cabling from within Creo? So if I have the extension, go to applications. Here's all the applications, just as we went to that Render Studio application. Cabling and piping are just separated, even though they are in the same application. And this will just change my ribbon around to reflect that now I am doing cable work. In particular, I'm going to be modifying an existing harness, and we're going to be importing an XML schematic from our Creo schematic solution here. So now we brought that in. So this XML document is directly linked up to this particular harness and this subassembly we're looking at. And I can go through and first do an auto designate. So the auto designate is going to try to match up as many objects from the Creo schematic that I drew all the way over to my assembly. And it does that mostly based off of a naming convention. It's going to look for one particular name in my schematic, and it's going to look for an equivalent reference model within my actual 3D design. And here we already did a lot of the work ahead of time. We already had a lot of the things named properly, and for things that weren't named properly, we matched them up manually. In this case, we still have a few different things to match up. As you can see, it's recognizing that there are a solenoid that it needs to see, but it's seeing that there's 4 different models and it doesn't know how to differentiate which one's which. So there might be a little bit of work in terms of actually assembling in a piece that might be missing, or in this case, we have a multiple status, which means there's 4 different models and it doesn't know which one of these is which. It doesn't know which one's the first one, which one's the third one, and so on and so forth. But as soon as we matched up 3 of them, we now recognize that there's 3 different models. There's only 1 left, so it can auto match the 4th one. Now we've done all the work in terms of actually linking up some of those objects that it recognized within my schematic that were needed to be found in my assembly. Now for the actual routes that we're applying between these, I can do a compare between my schematic and my actual assembly. And here we have the assembly electronics data against the XML cabling design that I have. And right at the top, it's pointing out all the pieces that we're missing. So we're missing a handful of wires that it's seeing in my schematic that I have not yet routed within my actual Creo model here. So we have, 10 plus cables that we still need to go through and actually put into my model. Now, placing those in is very easy, and this is where we can start if we don't have an XML. We're not starting in schematics, we're starting at this point. I'm going into a particular harness assembly that we have, and we're deciding how we're going to start routing these. One of the ways to route a cable is via network. So this is basically just sketch lines and points on top of my model that are going to determine what path do I want the actual route to follow. Now, this is one way to route. There are some other ways, like a simple route. We'll just take the shortest path from point A to point B. We can partly follow the route, follow the route up to a certain point and then maybe split off into the simplest way forward. We can also just follow existing cables, a cable that already exists and is already going to the exact location that I need. Maybe it just is, one pin over, have it follow that roughly. There's a few different ways to start off our routes, but we're gonna be looking into that. So as I said, the first route we're gonna do, find some of the cables if we do have an XML export. Otherwise, I'm just choosing a from and a to point. But as you're gonna see, when we bring these over and we recognize, okay, we have 14 cables that we still need to route, we're gonna route 4 of them at a time. It's already applying a lot of the information that I would have to be filling out. Where's it coming from? Where's it going to? The name is even grayed out. The spool is grayed out because those are being controlled from my schematic. If I did this fresh, I would just be filling that information out as I go and choosing the correct references as I go. Then if I'm using a schematic, it makes this really simple because all I'm really worried about as the actual designer is, okay, how do I route this? What's the path it's going to take? Is there things that this has to go through? Are there points that it has to avoid? I'm really just worried about the design work and not necessarily the logistics. There's not really a risk of me messing up here because it automatically knows where it's going to and where it's going from. I just need to make sure that it gets there okay within my model in the right path. So here we have that via a network, we routed 4 of those cables and they're already going into the correct location. We're going to continue doing some work. So we have a few more cables that we're going to route all at once. So we have a large chunk here that are all going to a very similar location. We can move those all over. We're going to be routing those all at once. And then as soon as we move them over, you can see in the 3D model, start to give me a quick preview, as well as it fills off that information over there. And I can go through and individually choose on each of those to see where they're going from, where they're going to, and how they're going to be routed. So if I want to do this all at once, again, I want to choose via network, a simple route, follow a cable, follow a pipeline. So those are my 4 different types of ways that I can follow this. So here we want to follow a cable. So we can choose exactly what those references are going to be, different points I want to choose from. And I want to choose, where it's going to start following the cable, where it's going to end following the cable. You can see all of them are going to be grouped up, follow along to the certain point that we selected, and then they're going to branch off and go their own way until they get to their designated locations that they need to end on. Now, there are sometimes some issues as we do the routing. As you can see, some of these cables are going through the actual CAD model here. But that's not really a problem. As the designer, it's going to be my job to make sure that this model is fixed up anyway. So we can always go back and reroute these really at any point. So if I want to do kind of a group route, make sure that they all get roughly to the same location, and then maybe go back and refine it a little bit and just move exactly their, what points are going to go to. Like, I just need to move these a little bit further so they're not completely interacting and intersecting with the existing models that I have. But I can go through and clean those up at any point. You can also have it do things like completely avoid going through a particular surface, a particular reference that I have. So there's a few ways to go through and route that. So now we want to add some of the extra stuff in. One of those things might be bundling these up. I want to create a bundle for this particular cable harness that I have. So there's a few options we can go through and able to be applying this, but it's basically going to try to do exactly what the cable did. We just choose some simple references on a network or on a particular cable. In this case, maybe choose all the different cables that I might want to include. Maybe some of these I don't want to include, so I could just go through and checkbox them if necessary. But then this is going to apply a bundle at the exact points that I had selected. And that's going to even clean up that simplified representation of the model as well. Just going to be one unified line that's going to be encompassing all the different cables I have. Now I can always go back and modify those bundles at any point or add things like different types of branches. So here is, we're going to create a new bundle, and this is just going to be something that goes and branches into another harness. So it's not going to be its own fresh one. We're going to be a branch. Choose some of the points that we might be concerned about. Again, where is it going to start with the bundle and where do I want it to go into? And that will just simplify everything here as well. Automatically move those cables into that bundle model, and they're still going to be able to recognize where they're starting, where they're going to end. So now a little bit more work that was done on this particular model. You know, that this isn't the only cable harness that we were concerned about on this overall model. We also have some of these other things hidden away. So there was a lot more work that was done in the background here to get this thing fully modeled out. Now the question becomes, okay, well, now we're almost done, but I might have a model update. Something new was added in. We're going to route the final cables that we have here. So here we just have, you know, one or two cables that we have added on maybe last minute here. So we're going to be able to recognize that they're going to similar locations to some of those other cables, but right now they're not included with those bundles that we had because they were just done a little bit separately. But it's not really a problem. We can go back at any point and modify anything that we've done, any routes that we've established already. In this case, we're just going to go modify a bundle and say we're either going to add or delete or extract a particular cable. So adding those in is really just as easy as selecting the bundle, say modify, and then choosing the new references. So now at the end of the process, we go back to our overall, that checklist that we had, and this will allow me to check that work and make sure I have all the objects linked up against that overall Creo schematic. So this really allows me to not just build out a routed system within Creo a lot quicker than if we were doing the traditional method of actually creating 3D geometry for all these individual wires. It allows me to make sure that I always have the most up-to-date information from a schematic, and I might have all that logic just defined ahead of time. So as a designer, I'm just doing my job in terms of going through and actually routing the cables, not determining where they're supposed to be going. Now, in terms of deliverables, we have a separate extension called the harness manufacturing extension. So this allows me to automatically create drawings from anything that I've done within piping and cabling. It's going to be a little bit different for pipes because you're not really worried about creating a harness for that. But the harness specific to the cabling portion of this allows me to create all kinds of deliverables automatically. So this is what you get automatically from just pressing that one flatten harness button, not kind of really hands off in terms of what you're doing here. It's going to generate a from to table for every single cable we have with individual lengths for all those cables. So it gives me a really good idea of how much I need in regards to those. We also get a drawing representation of that flattened harness that I can go through and annotate and modify and add callouts onto and add different measurements onto. We also get information related to all the different connectors that we have and all the different terminals that we've placed on here, you know, what wires are going into where. We also get a full drawing of the 3D model in context. And in the bottom right, we also get a complete bill of material of all the different material that we're going to need for this. So that is the harness manufacturing extension, which is a add-on to the piping and cabling. Really just allows me to create those deliverables for my cabling extension in a more automated fashion. And that is the piping and cabling extension as well within Creo Parametric.